The Reverend Jesse Jackson was a close associate of the late Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. He worked long and hard in the civil rights struggles of the 60s. In 1972, he left the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and formed his own organization, People United to Serve Humanity, PUSH. But through all his years in the public eye, he has never before run for public office. Now, at 42, he says he will be a Democratic candidate for the presidency. This despite the fact that most top black leaders oppose his candidacy because they feel that blacks will have more to gain from supporting a candidate who has a real chance to beat Ronald Reagan. In any case, his candidacy will be the first by a black that might just significantly affect the outcome of a Democratic convention and a presidential election. We spoke with the Reverend Jackson this morning in New York. Reverend Jackson, you're going to announce on Thursday that you are running for President of the United States.
Thursday in Washington, D.C. at the Convention Center.
What took you so long to make up your mind? After all, the 7 other Democratic candidates, and you're going to run in the Democratic Party, have been declared months ago.
We had to start them further back. After all, we started against greater odds. Historically, blacks, women, Hispanics, and Jews, because of race, religion, sex, have been, in effect, discouraged from seeking to serve at the highest level in this nation. A part of our mission is to break down that barrier so as to open up the options for everybody. 7 white males running is an all-white primary. It's rather unrepresentative of locked-out people.
In Atlanta, the mayor of Atlanta, an old friend of yours, Andrew Young, says no to Jackson. In Los Angeles, another black mayor, Tom Bradley, no to Jackson. In Detroit, Coleman Young, the mayor, no to Jackson. In Georgia, Julian Bond, a state senator, an old friend of yours, no to Jackson. Wilson Good in Philadelphia, who likely will be the new black mayor of Philadelphia, no to Jackson. These are men who control the machinery in major cities across America, and they all say no to Jesse Jackson.
But you must understand that no candidate can expect to have unanimous support from any given community. All candidates must get their votes from the open market. And none of the candidates have inherited any votes, nor can anyone bequeath anybody any votes. All of us must get our votes the old-fashioned way. So as opposed to dealing in high-profile personalities, there are many governors and senators that say no to Mondale and no to Glenn and to the others of them. We simply must take our risk in the open market. And there is substantial evidence that if the masses begin to move from the bottom up, that then becomes the area of our concentration.
But here's Joseph Lowery of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Your old outfit says no to Jackson. Here is John Jacob of the Urban League, no to Jackson. Here is Benjamin Hooks of the NAACP, no to Jackson. And perhaps most important of all, the widow of the man with whom you worked so closely, Coretta Scott King, no to Jesse Jackson's candidacy. The question that is raised is, do these people know something or feel something about Jesse Jackson that keeps them from endorsing your candidacy?
Well, I would think, number one, I have not announced the candidacy before now for them to have the option to endorse, point one. Point two, I think that what the polls show is that the vast body of the 18 to 24-year-old group is very inspired by the candidacy. 25% of all eligible black voters are between ages 18 and 24. That group has been voting at about a 10% level. It's obvious it will move above 50% now. What's key to us is that there are 10 million eligible black voters, 18 million eligible, 10 million registered. If we moved to get another 3 to 4 million on the books by next November, we will have changed Democratic options in the primaries.
A recent CBS News poll found that Americans, what they want in the ideal president are intelligence, caring, compassion, and honesty. This is a delicate question to have to try to put. No one faults your intelligence. No one faults your compassion. And I don't think that people fault you on honesty, but there is a certain sense that I have heard in talking to people about, because I knew that I was going to be talking to you today, somehow there is some skepticism. Whether it's your ego, your ambition, your lack of follow-through, you light the spark, but your rhetoric is superb, but there isn't the performance afterwards. There is some skepticism about perhaps a lack of faith, a lack of trust in Jesse Jackson.
Those who march to the beat of a different drummer always looked upon with a certain distance. And I accept that role and that responsibility. I've not operated out of a very structured arrangement. But I submit to you that I do have intelligence and character, and I am trustworthy, and I have followed through. We've followed through across the years. There really is no foundation in that charge.
Foreign policy. Would you have sent troops to invade Grenada?
Absolutely not.
Why?
One, it would have broken the treaty with OAS. Right now, the position that we have taken, occupying Grenada, has had the impact of putting America in isolation. Mexico, most of Latin America, Britain, and France, we find ourselves in a very terrible predicament in world affairs. I think that we should have tried to negotiate the American students out, assuming that they were in danger. And so far, there is no conclusive evidence that they were in danger. I certainly would not have participated in a press lockout that gives the whole move dictatorial overtones. That is to say, that when a general can decide that the press should not have the right to take the risk. And the American public is only left with a general and a defense secretary's point of view. The American public has lost its right as a civilian population to help determine military policy.
Beirut, would you have sent American Marines in to help keep the peace in Beirut?
I would not have. I would have supported a peacekeeping presence there, perhaps by the UN or perhaps by non-aligned states. But America, see, the peacekeeping forces, by definition, must be neutral. America's presence there is provocative because American money has been so involved in those wars. But the American soldiers there are simply sitting ducks, and they become the object of 30 years of anti-Americanism in that area.
Would you now pull them out immediately?
As quickly as possible, and I mean real quick. That is to say that you need to replace them with other troops. But I submit to you that given our present options where our boys are there without a mission, where they cannot in fact find the enemy to respond to, as has been said, that if the mission is military, it's too few of them there. If the issue is suicide, it's too many of them there. We simply find ourselves in a no-win situation, and we should stop this macho posturing where we have to risk the lives of our young men just to get ego gratification for our leadership.
Would you favor deploying the Pershing and cruise missiles in Western Europe by December?
I would favor negotiation over deployment. I would favor delay over deployment. We need the American president to take an initiative and to bring about peace in Europe.
And go to
Geneva. I think there must be a real serious challenge to Mr. Andropov to meet Mr. Reagan face to face. The fact of the matter is, Mike, that at this point in world history, that for the head of the USSR and the USA to not have talked is extremely dangerous and risky.
Talking about dangerous and risky, what qualifies Jesse Jackson to run the foreign policy, let alone the economic policy, the social policy of the greatest superpower in the world?
Number one, I'm the same age John Kennedy was. It's not a matter of age. I meet constitutional requirements. You have to be age 35. You have to be an American citizen. You have to get the most votes to convince people that they can trust you. So I meet all of the constitutional requirements. Beyond that, my experience base is even broader than Mr. Reagan's was in foreign policy before he became president. I've been to Africa. He is not. I've been to the Middle East. He is not.
You believe in a Palestinian homeland?
I'm convinced that
a Palestinian state?
I believe that they should have a homeland.
When you went to the Middle East and you talked with Yasser Arafat, you're quoted as saying, "I'm sick and tired of hearing about the Holocaust and having America being put in the position of a guilt trip. The Jews do not have a monopoly in suffering."
That's a distorted view of my attitude and what happened in the Middle East. I submit to you that I have great anxieties and in some instances regrets about the misunderstanding that came out of the Middle East. First of all, Mike, I am not anti-Semitic. Number two, I support Israel's right to exist within secure borders and that are internationally recognized. And I think that the present formula that we're using in the Middle East is against our national interest. I challenged Arafat while in the Middle East to recognize Israel's right to exist with security as a precondition even for his own political objectives at that time. And again, I submit that challenging him to recognize Israel's right to exist must not be seen as an anti-Semitic act.
Who would you like for your vice presidential running mate?
Balance can no longer be north-south, east and west. It must be male-female. We must grow out the habit of ignoring the legitimacy of the role of women in American politics.
What are you saying?
I'm saying that if Mrs. Thatcher can run Britain, and if Mrs. can run Britain, and Mrs. Gandhi can run India, that there are women can run this country. Surely a woman can be on the ticket for 1984. Surely a woman can in fact head the ticket. The idea of male superiority must give way to the new reality that we now accept.
Are you now saying that you will choose, if you can, a woman, be she white or black?
There's no doubt about it.
Your own son, Jesse Jr., goes to a minimally integrated private school in Washington, D.C., St. Albans, correct?
Correct.
Is there nothing inappropriate about that?
No, it's within the law.
Within the law. But a man who talks about poor people, a man who talks about we've got to put together this rainbow coalition of poor people, women, deprived people, Hispanics, and so forth, whose own son, a fine young man, nonetheless goes to a school where I believe the number of minorities is less than 10%. There seems to be some contradiction here.
I have 4 children in public school. I have 1 child in a private school. I've always fought for the options of American education, but I would never fight for tuition tax credit and not assume my responsibility and allow my money to be diverted away from supporting public schools. I have 5 children, and Mike, I have learned in rearing them, I don't love them equally, I love them adequately, and they require different things. I exercise all of my options to protect the best interests of my children while not imposing or infringing upon the interests of the masses of children in this country.
Why do you want to be president?
I'm concerned about our measurement for greatness. Our greatness is not just in power, but in values. We failed to honor the Treaty of Guadalupe. That was power. We enslaved blacks. That was power. We dropped bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That was power, but we're not proud of that. We're really proud of giving me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses. That's really what made America great. And therefore, I submit to you that you measure America's greatness by what America does for the least of these. America has educated more people than any other nation. That's what made us great. That's what made us the most productive. And that's why I say that I want to help, again, measure greatness by how we treat children in the dawn of life, and how we treat poor people in the pit of life, and how we treat old folk in the sunset of life. That's the America I want to identify with.
If we didn't tell you who they were, you'd probably never guess. They are the family of Jesse Jackson, and by and large, they are camera shy. At least they were until tonight. Not so the man of the family, a fighter for civil rights, once again fighting for the Democratic nomination for president, and yesterday he made it official. But what do any of us really know about the private Jesse Jackson, his wife and children? He and his family have lived in this comfortable house in a quiet, now mostly black neighborhood on the south side of Chicago for almost 20 years. And very seldom do the Jacksons open their door to reporters, but they agreed to do just that for us. He met his wife Jackie when they were in college at North Carolina A&T, and he heeds her counsel, and she is not bashful about giving it to him and to us.
I don't think you have a right to bring the camera to my bedroom. I don't think you have the right to come into my home without permission. And should we today in this interview reach certain questions, I will tell you that I do not discuss warts and moles, and I do not discuss certain vulgar questions.
You never worry about this fella when he's on the road. I mean, come on,
My husband married me, and then I married him. And I will always be married to Jesse Jackson, and he knows that.
No matter what?
No matter what, he is my husband, and he's a good husband.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jackson, for the moment, is running ahead of all the other Democrats in the opinion polls, but those same polls show that many Americans remain wary of him. A lot of people are afraid of you. Around the country, I go and ask people about Jesse Jackson. Oh, he's smart. He's got a big mouth. He's a demagogue. He's smart. But there's something a little untrustworthy. I'm not sure that I'm not afraid of him. Don't you answer that, Reverend Jackson. You know that, Mrs. Jackson.
Well, I've heard that, and I don't, for the fear of sounding wifely, I don't understand it because I trust him myself.
Then why this image? Why this image?
People tend to get along much better with people who are plastic, who are passive, who are predictable, but they will not follow them. It's a love-hate syndrome with leader and people to that extent. They love you because of your strength and fear you because of it.
4 of the 5 Jackson children were at home the day we visited. Jesse Jackson Jr. recently graduated from North Carolina A&T, and Jonathan will graduate later this year. Yusef is at St. Albans Prep School in Washington, and younger sister Jackie goes to Fay Prep School in Massachusetts. Their older sister, Santita, was not at home. I don't know that I'll get an honest answer, but... Drugs? Any of you? Ever?
Never here.
Never.
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 Never even experiment.
No temptation?
No.
Never an experiment.
Who brought you up?
I think both of our parents did, to be very honest with you, Mr. Wallace.
Our father spends much of his time on the road, and although we didn't have his physical presence, he oftentimes had us travel with him. Things would come up. There would be people that were being falsely accused that he would try to stand in courtrooms for. There were people that were workers that were locked out that he would want us to see the picket line. So he had us involved in his work, understanding the struggle of people.
I think another important aspect of our ring is that our parents comfort us. They make us feel comfortable. For example, my mother loves to laugh, and we enjoy making her laugh. So we feel comfortable, and by that, she gives us confidence. And so we feel, when we leave this house, we feel that we can go and do anything. I know some friends at school who have parental problems. They say they argue with their parents. They want to move out the house. That has always been foreign to me. I never understood how someone can not get along with their parents.
Have you ever thought about what you want to be when you grow up?
I want to be a swimmer. I'm not into politics.
But when Jackson was young, he was already into politics. Here in Greenville, South Carolina, where he grew up, he fought against the racism of the society that he was born into.
This is the house in which I was born. I was born next door to a white church. I could only attend as a janitor. Or a white school down the street. Could only attend as a janitor or cook, but not as a student. And my mother and father created an atmosphere that motivated my brother and I to rise above our circumstances.
He certainly favors you physically.
He does?
He looks like you
Thank
physically.
you, sir. Thank you.
And it's a little... Helen Jackson was unmarried, a 17-year-old high school senior when Jesse was born. It's something she feels uncomfortable talking about today. When Jesse was 2, she wed Charles Jackson, a postal worker, who became Jesse's stepfather and one of the male role models in his life. Mrs. Jackson remembers that early on, Jesse seemed to be born with a special gift.
That is one thing about Jesse. He was born with a vision.
What do you mean he was born with a
You
vision?
see, I mean, he can see things, you know. And
Really?
yes, he can. I mean, he is, whether it's prophetic or whatever, that's just one of his God-given talents that the Lord gave him.
I must say there's an awful lot of love around that house where your mother and your grandmother live.
Well, and what does love do for a child that milk can't do? It breeds security.
That security existed even though he didn't know until he was 9 that the man next door, Noah Robinson, had fathered him out of wedlock. To our surprise, while driving us through Old Greenville, Jackson brought us to visit Noah Robinson.
2 fathers. I was blessed.
My father had 5 brothers, all 5 of them were preachers. And Jesse took after my father. I gave him my father's name and my name, so he got to preach.
So you really are a mixture of the 2 families.
Oh, yeah.
Jesse and Lewis and Jackson.
Yeah.
Yes.
And is this country going to elect a black man president?
Sooner or later. Could be sooner.
Good to see you, friends.
Jackson has come home to Greenville in part to help with research for a planned autobiography for which he says he received a $350,000 advance. He says he no longer draws a salary from Operation Push. Instead, he earns $100,000 a year speaking before church and civic groups and as a consultant to the Rainbow Coalition that he created. Jackson remains a Southerner, and he surprised us. He is a little suspicious of some big city Northerners. Did you ever live in New York?
No. Wouldn't even try it.
Why not?
Because people steal. There's no sense of neighborhood, consciousness and stuff.
As he toured Greenville, he stopped by to visit with a stepsister in a neighborhood where he used to live.
This is my stepsister coming here.
Serious?
Yeah. She's deaf.
She's happy to see her brother.
Oh, I'm glad to see her, too.
Papa.
How you doing? On Green Avenue, where Jesse hung out when he was young, they're still hanging out today at the old pool hall. Though some of his old high school mates are still here 30 years later, Jackson left this environment early to gain glory in football at all-black Sterling High School. And you played ball in this?
I did, in the stadium.
As quarterback?
As quarterback. But we had to sit at the end of the stadium down there in some blocks. On the very end, there was a section for colored only. You learn quite early where not to sit in the stadium. You learn quite early where to sit on the bus. Or you learn quite early what the consequences are. They're very violent.
What would happen if you sat in the white section of the stadium or the white section of the bus?
Well, either be arrested or beaten or both.
Jackson first actively responded to the indignities he suffered when he was in high school and worked at a local hotel as a waiter. He told Life magazine back in 1969 that he would spit in white people's food. You worked at the Poinsett Hotel, in the kitchen, and if you didn't like somebody out front, you spat in their food.
You know, during the 1968-69 period, with all of the killing and the riots and the rage, people were fighting back many ways.
Right.
I mean, one way to fight back was to prove that you would fight back, that you were not afraid. But I did not do that, and really shouldn't have said it, but I did, was fighting back. And that's not who I am, and that's not what I did.
Well, you're saying you didn't do it, but you said you did.
That's right. It was a way of fighting back.
Growing up, did you get bitter about whites?
A lot of pain. Bitterness for a while. I grew out of the bitterness, and I have to attribute a lot of that, in some sense, to Dr. King, who argued that we should get better and not bitter.
But one issue that has caused some bitterness on both sides is Jackson's relationship to the Jewish community. And I raised that issue at a Boston fundraiser. In the primaries, big Democratic money is Jewish money. And you're still having trouble with that, with them.
Well, I certainly would not segregate the resources based on religious and ethnic basis.
No, I've done that.
And I really wish you wouldn't. I do not want to address that because I think that's a no-win situation.
It's a no-win situation because many Jews still remember Jackson 4 years ago describing New York City as Hymietown.
Brothers and sisters, let us receive the next president of the United States, the Reverend Jesse Louis Jackson.
And 4 years ago, Jackson's close association with black Muslim leader Louis Farrakhan. Recently on the campaign trail, Jackson criticized a black supporter for continuing to bring up his rift with Jews. And his relationship with Jews is obviously a sensitive issue in the Jackson household. What people wonder, some people, is it conceivable that Jesse Jackson is anti-Semitic?
Well, that was very painful to me to even hear that suggestion, because it's for one to suggest that we may be anti-Semitic. And that is still very painful for me, because we are not.
I think I was the first one to walk up to my father and told him that I had a Jewish friend named Jaime, and what was the hang-up about the Jaimetown incident. And he said, well, there are a great deal of Jewish people from New York. And I said, well, I've got a lot of friends named Hyman and named Jaime. And he said, that's just a nickname, and somehow it's been blown out of proportion. It's being taken negatively.
He talked about Jaimetown. Mistake. He then had Louis Farrakhan working with him, and he decided he was not going to disavow the support of Louis Farrakhan at that time. You told him not to apologize about Jaimetown and not to cave in on the Farrakhan matter.
Louis Farrakhan came to us when we had very little support, when any number of threats were on my husband's life. He had an organization that was very organized, his very sophisticated system.
That, quote, sophisticated system Black Muslim leader Louis Farrakhan provided for Jackson in 1984 was a security force that protected the Jackson family prior to their getting Secret Service protection. The reason? The hundreds of death threats Jackson said he received in 1984.
314 at last report, and 14 people actually arrested for assassination plots.
314 death threats?
That was the last report that the Secret Service gave to us, and 14 people were actually arrested because plots had been taken to that extreme.
If I perish, let me perish.
Jonathan Youssef and I, even when traveling with our father, have assumed the responsibility for protection in some areas of our father, and would even go so far as to stand in the middle of someone that might try to do bodily harm to him. I think that the importance of what he represents is certainly worth my own life and our own lives. Do we agree?
I agree.
And Jesse Jackson knows the frightening reality of assassination, for he was there when Dr. Martin Luther King was shot.
I was on the ground below, not on the same level, but on the ground below. And he was saying to me, Jesse, we're going out to dinner, you don't have a towel. And so I said, well, Dr. King, you know, having a towel is not a prerequisite for eating. Having an appetite is. He laughed. He said, you're crazy. And I said, Doc. And he turned away. The bullet hit him and knocked him.
You mean you're down below and you're talking to him up there?
That's right. The bullet came from this way, hit him and knocked him down.
Toward the end of our few days together, I asked Jackson about an issue which, in light of the withdrawals of Gary Hart and Joe Biden from the Democratic race, now affects all the candidates.
What about the personal morality of Jesse Jackson?
You will never be free.
Whether it's money or sex or whatever.
That's right, money, sex, or violence. You will never be free of the accusation. So if I falter, at least I will not be burdened by guilt.
And if you falter, you're out of the race, period.
Well, that's not true.
Well, wait a minute.
Life is not that absolute.
If Gary Hart had to leave, I think Jesse Jackson would have to leave.
Well, you're raising another question now.
No, I say you're out of the race. You're talking moral leadership.
Political leadership, the political race.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yes.
Well, during the course of a campaign, there are going to be errors. No one is going to run a perfect race.
No, I'm talking about moral errors. I'm talking about sex, drugs, money, whatever.
Well, in this race, one would expect that leadership, all of the leadership, whatever one's background may be, is going to have to put forth the highest and the best in moral leadership. You must expect it of yourself, and the nation needs it, and the office deserves it.
Though he still leads all the other Democratic candidates in the polls, Jesse Jackson stubbed his toe this week. His wife had signed on his behalf a contract that would permit the use of his name and his message to advertise a chain of business schools. An embarrassed Jackson at week's end said he had told his lawyers to try to get the contract canceled.